Hey everyone, Tristan back with another video, and in this video I am reviewing the Focal Elear headphones. These are them here. You may have seen my prior unboxing video of these, so check that out, but also I wanted to show you the case. This is the case that they come with, which is really nice. The case also fits the Elear as well as the Utopia headphones, and it's a very form-fitting case. You can see here it's got a place for the cables and your little 1/4 inch to mini jack. It's very form-fitting and they fit very nicely in this case. So that's really a nice touch that they come with that. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that, because the Utopias, which are a lot more expensive headphones, and the Elear, which is a lower end headphone, both don't come with the case. These headphones also come with nice cables now. I think Focal was really listening, because the Utopia and the Elear came with a really long, thick cable that was quite heavy. The cable that comes, or the cables, because it comes with three, the cables that come with the Elear is really a nice cable, much lighter. It's cloth sheathed, as you can see here. And they include 3 different cables. They include a 3-meter balance 4-pin XLR cable. They include a 3-meter phono cable, which is the one that I have attached to it here. And then they also include a 2-meter cable for portable use as well. On the ear cup side, it's a 3.5 millimeter connector, as you can see here, and it's got a little plastic grommet here that fits right, into the receptacle quite nicely, and then it just kind of clicks in. So there's not like a screw down or anything like that, but it holds pretty tightly. And then you can kind of see here it's labeled left and right. Where is it? Yeah, right here, left and right on the headphones, and also the cable is labeled left and right too. I think the look of these is really cool. They look a lot better, in my opinion, than the Elears, and they look to me as cool as the Utopia with the sort of silver color. It's got kind of a rich sort of upscale look. As you can see, the ear pads are sort of this micro suede or Alcantara type material, and they're perforated. And then you have a little bit of that on the underside of the headband too. They're very comfortable headphones. Going back to the cables real quick for a second here, though, these are fully oxygen-free copper cables, so they're like a copper cable. I don't know if it's solid conductors or stranded or what inside. I'm not really sure. I think someone would have to dissect one of these to find out. But it is really a nice cable, and probably with these you don't have any need for like an upgrade cable or anything like that, because I think that these cables sound and look and feel really good. Now let me talk a little bit about build quality. While these look and feel nice in terms of build quality, one thing that disappointed me is there's a little bit of a discoloration on the mesh right here. You can see that little dark spot right there. When I opened them up, that's the first thing that I noticed, and I think that's just a manufacturing defect on Focal's part. But these headphones are going to have to go back, because when you're spending $1,500 on headphones, you kind of want them to be perfect when they're brand new. So that's one negative with these headphones that I found in terms of the quality control on them. But overall build quality seems very good in general. So let's talk about how these sound, both in comparison to the other Focal headphones, the Elear and the Utopia, as well as comparing them to my favorite headphones of late, the Sony MDR-Z1Rs. First of all, let me state that if you're interested in a pair of Focal headphones, the Elears are the ones to get, in my opinion. They sound better than the Elear and the Utopia, in my opinion. And the price is pretty good on them too, at $1,500. So they're not I think overly priced like the Utopia, which is like $4,000, although they have lowered the price sometimes. And these sound better than the Elears, which are $1,000. Speaking of that, so the way that these sound better than the Elears is primarily in the mid-range. The mid-range is just a lot better and more smooth and refined on the Elears. The Elear mid-range had a little bit of an upper mid-range hole, in my opinion, which tended to make the vocals sound a little bit odd sometimes. So that you don't have that problem at all with the Elears. The Elears, the vocals sound quite smooth, and you don't really have like that frequency hole in the mid-range with the Elears. In terms of comparing them with the Utopias, well, these have smoother highs than Utopias, and to me sound a lot more refined in that respect. The Utopia sounded a bit brittle and harsh in the highs, and that also kind of tended to lead to an overall sort of lean sound signature, where you don't have as much of a lean sound signature with the Focal Clears, although it is still a little bit lean because the bass on the Focal Clears is a little bit low. It could stand to use a little bit more bass. So that's my one sort of complaint with the Clears, is that they really could use a bit more bass. They do have quite good bass, and it is there. It just could be a little bit more for my liking. And the overall sound signature of the Clears, I would have to say, is still on the sort of a little bit lean side. Like the other Focal models, these are open headphones, and they're very open. So when you put them on, you can almost hear no change in difference in terms of like any attenuation in the room noise in the room that you're in. And they also leak sound quite a bit as well. So people next to you or whatever in the room will be able to hear what you're listening to perfectly well. Now let's talk about how the Focal Clears sound overall. Let's start with the bass. Well, as I mentioned, they are a bit bass lean for my liking. Now you can bass boost in like digital EQ to get them to sound, you know, pretty rockin' and pretty good. However, the overall sound signature is a slightly bit lean due to that fact. And that was sort of the case with the Utopia as well. Although the Elear, I think, tends to have a little bit more of a bass boost than either the Clears or the Utopia. That said, these aren't lacking in bass necessarily, and certainly have more bass than something like the Sennheiser HD800S. But I've seen some reviews online saying that they thought the sound signature of these was absolutely perfect, except it could use a little bit more bass, and I would tend to agree with that. In terms of the mids are really quite nice on these, very smooth, very present, smoother than the Focal Utopia, which tended to have a little bit more of a brittleness in the mids. These still have some brittleness and some breathiness in the mids, but you know, in comparison to something like my Sony Z1Rs, but they don't have that upper mid-range hole like the Focal Elears have. So the mids on these are really quite nice. Vocals sound great on them. They are a bit clinical sounding, but maybe not as much as the Utopias, which are quite clinical and analytical. These do tend to be a little bit smoother. And then that sort of leads me to talking about the highs. The highs on these definitely are a little bit toned back and smoother than the highs on the Utopia, and therefore don't have as lean of a sound. They have more of a warm sound than the Utopias for sure, although still the overall sound signature does tend to be quite resolving and a little bit clinical. One of the things I notice is that pretty much like all the Focal headphones, these tend to have sort of a fast sound signature. And what I mean by that is if you play a song that has a lot going on in the upper treble and the treble, sometimes it tends to have a buzzy sound, and sometimes even on vocals that buzziness can translate into the vocals as well. So if you have something that's like a really fast piece, like with a lot of drums and a lot of stuff going on in the percussion, it tends to lead to some buzziness in the treble on these headphones. It's not a major problem, it's more of a minor issue for me, but it's something to take note of in terms of the overall sound signature of the Focal Clear headphones. How do these compare to my favorite headphones of late, the Sony Z1Rs? Well, I have to say that the Sony Z1Rs definitely provide a more impactful, a bit of a smoother sound and a thicker, richer sound. I think they both resolve equally as well, in my opinion. It's just the sound signature is a bit different. Now, interestingly, the Focal Clears and the Sony Z1Rs have an equal sound stage, in my opinion. And I'm kind of lucky that I was able to plug both of these into the same source. I have the Cord Hugo TT, which has actually 3 headphone outputs. And so I was able to plug these into the Cord Hugo TT at the same time, play the same track, and then just put these on, you know, listen for 10 seconds or something, take them off, and put the other headphones on, listen for 10 seconds, and just go back and forth that way. So I was really able to get a sense of the comparison of the sound signature between both headphones. And so I found it interesting that the Focal Clears and the Sony Z1Rs have about equal sound staging. So my conclusion on the sound stage is that the Z1Rs are pretty amazing for being closed headphones because their sound stage is just as wide as the Focal Clears. The Focal Clear doesn't have a super wide sound stage and not quite as wide as something like the HD800S, but still pretty wide. The Z1Rs definitely have more impactful lower bass, and I really enjoy that. One of the things I did was listen to Metallica's Master of Puppets remaster album on both headphones, and it sounded good on the clears, but as soon as I switched to the Z1Rs, it was like, yeah, you know, I could really rock more. You know, it just was more there in terms of hearing those guitars and hearing the impact of the drums, especially the bass drums and stuff like that. Whereas that impact wasn't on these headphones as much. I think the Focal headphones can actually stand to have bigger drivers. They have 40mm drivers, which in my opinion is a little bit small in terms of providing a thickness or richness to the sound. The Sony Z1Rs have big 70mm drivers. And so when you're switching between the two headphones, you really notice that. The Sonys just sound richer and thicker overall, and just seem to have a little bit more oomph behind them in terms of the sound signature, whereas the Focal Clears tend to sound a bit leaner in terms of sound signature. In some ways, I sort of think the Focal high-end headphones might even be like too open for their own good in a way, because in all of them, the Focal Elear, the Clear, and the Utopia, I kind of find myself wanting a little bit more oomph in the sort of lower mids and the bass, in terms of it could almost use like a little bit of resonance or something in the bass. It seems like the fact that they're so open, a lot of that bass and lower mid is kind of missed or not heard in a lot of respects with regards to the overall sound signature of these headphones. That being said, the Focal Clears, in my opinion, are the ones to get if you're looking for an open headphone. And I think in this price range, they're really hard to beat. They sound, you know, really quite smooth and engaging. It's just that when I compare them to my Z1Rs, they weren't as engaging. Or as, you know, fun to listen to in my opinion. When listening to these, I could kind of like sit back and listen to the music and hear everything really clearly and really enjoy it. But then when switching to the Z1Rs, I could still hear all that stuff, but enjoy it more and just sort of feel it more, just because it has a richer tonality and sort of a thickness behind the sound, whereas this has a little bit more of a thinness, you know, behind the sound. So it's just sort of a personal preference kind of a thing. And then of course you have the issue of these being completely open and providing no isolation at all, whereas the Z1Rs are closed headphones and do provide a little bit of isolation. In terms of the impedance and how hard these are to drive, these are 55 ohms, so they're really not that hard to drive, although they do benefit from a headphone amplifier for sure. I mean, you know, they sound pretty good out of like an iPhone directly, but certainly driving them out of you know, a good quality headphone output or headphone amplifier is going to make these shine. In terms of price to performance ratio, I think Focal has a winner on their hands with these. You know, in my review of the Utopia, I said I thought that they were too expensive, and I still think that, whereas I think that at $1,500, the Focal Clear is worth it at that price, given the sound quality that you get, the look and feel of them, and as well as everything that it comes with in terms of the 3 different cables and the case and all that. So this has been my review and look of the Focal Clear headphones. Really great headphones, and I think ones that are definitely worth considering in this price point for sure.